What is the worst thing you've ever seen someone do at a funeral? A few years back, when the uncle of my mother died, my young cousin, 8, cried a lot at the funeral. It took some time, but eventually he calmed down and his parents went for a little walk with him for some distraction. But then he noticed that his first name was written on one of the tombstones. He mentions it loudly and one of the bystanders said, "Yeah, it's already reserved for you." He immediately started crying again. When I went to India a few years ago, my cousin and I had to walk single file on the footpath, and obviously since I'm not a local, I took it more leisurely pace-wise as it is a footpath, in the loosest possible way. I also wanted to get a third-person view of her, to take in the men we walked past staring at her. They stare at her regardless of whether she meets their gaze or not, and at a horrifying high rate, vast majority who saw her, stared. It's so fucking creepy. If you take a glance at anyone, whether you are even attracted to that gender or not, sometimes everyone admire the work say a fella with huge arms or legs has put in, or who look different etc. You don't stare, let alone if you meet said person's gaze. As an aside, it's funny, as my uncle said that, you don't even look Indian. And when you open your mouth you erase all doubt, pointing to both my looks, less harsh sun so a lighter skin tone, and my Hindi, most common Indian language, is passable, but about as good as a 3-year-old, which is actually decent. 3-year-olds know a lot of words, meaning these fellas could be staring at the half-alien, kind of like you'd stare at a Ted Cruz in a line of humans, or with E. But of course decent-looking young woman trumps all. It's like a social fucking contract but nah. Long-ass stares. Then you look at Facebook posts of any Indian girls who are decent-looking plus, and it's all 150 plus likes, all with the same comments for that picture, always with the adjective misspelled in the exact same way, by several thirsty men, a large segment being guys who are 10 plus years older than that girl's parents. The comment is always, "Betterful, sick," or, "Great snap, yes," with that wonky capitalization, etc. It's so fucking transparent, and it's even worse as these guys are related in some way to that girl and they are still so beshram, shameless, be it through her parents or with E. I feel like making a comment dripping with irony, perhaps an amalgamation of the common comments i.e., betterful great snap name, totally not creepy. I don't know if these girls are putting up photos less frequently because of this, or if it's some validation, even from creepy guys, when the girl is feeling down or low on confidence. It's twisted that these poor women are not only objectified, can't walk out late at night, already sketchy in the West, defs no in Asia, judged on things other than merit, make less money for the same work, are disadvantaged in several ways, but also are bound to have these interactions are their only options a, ignore it, b, speak up about it, creating a scene, which they are seen as, instigating, c, try to work it into a twisted positive, they stare because you are pretty, at least they are staring. A local boy died after being hit by a car while riding his bike. I think he was like 11/12 at the time. His sister, known to all to be very attention-seeking, immediately was doing news interviews which just seemed odd, considering he had died earlier that day, but whatever, people grieve differently I suppose. But then at his wake, she took a few photos of him in the casket and posted it to her public Instagram story. It was super bizarre and just bad taste. I knew a guy who climbed up into the casket with his grandfather. This one's sweet and wholesome. He was around 4 years old. He wasn't sure what was going on, and people weren't giving him much attention. He asked someone what his grandfather was doing in a box at the front of the room. A relative, thinking they were explaining death in an age-appropriate way, told him that Grandpa went to sleep, and won't wake up again. So we went up to the casket, and climbed up. The room froze in shock. Then he said, "Good night, Grandpa," and he kissed him. Adults told him later you could hear a pin drop and there wasn't a dry eye in the room. There was a movie where this guy's wife died, senior couple, and at the funeral the husband tried hopping in the casket to either embrace or hump the dead woman. When the old dude realized that it wasn't his wife but rather a 20 to 30-year-old hot woman, he tried to close the casket and start groping her chest. He then found his actual dead wife's casket and rested his hand on the side, but the legs of the casket immediately broke and I think fell and slid into a raging fire. If anyone knows what movie I'm talking about, please remind me. I think the old guy was Leslie Nielsen LMFAO. My mom passed 2 days before my first child was born. I didn't get pregnant again till 11 years later, so I was 5 months pregnant with my second child when my father passed. Someone came up to me at the funeral and said to me, "You should stop having kids, it's bad luck for your family." I'm sorry for your losses and for that person who said something awful at a vulnerable time. There's some serious deficiency in social etiquette at funerals, I swear. When my grandmother died a year after my grandfather, my dad told me my grandparents died because I had my kids, and that when a new baby is born someone from the family dies and it's just the way it is. He and the person that said this to you are assholes. Our kids aren't any sort of bad luck. Death is a certainty and it hurts so much. That's all. My grandparents thought my kids were a wonderful blessing to our family, to the earth, to my life. They each passed shortly after the birth of my kids, and like your parents, knew about the babies and met one of them. I just know they both were so proud of you and got so much joy from raising you. We are so lucky to have shown them our success and growth and motherhood. We always want more time than the amount we get. It's never long enough when you love someone. I know your parents adored your kids and would not for a moment blame you for their own passing. We cremated my uncle. He lived across from a lake, and it was decided that we wanted his ashes spread on this little island on this lake. I was tasked with swimming with the urn from the boat to the island, holding it out of the water. I then stood at the edge of a small cliff with my nephews beside me and all the family watching in the boat. I opened the urn to dump his ashes over the cliff. We all say a few things, and as I go to dump the ashes, the wind picks up and blows the ashes all over my wet body. One of the worst things that ever happened to me. My uncle died. He was gay. My grandmother couldn't handle that. My uncle left a letter to be read at his funeral. I don't know if my grandmother planned it all alone or what, but gets to the part that says, "And to my nieces and nephews, I want you to know." And instead of reading what was there, I know cause me and my dad helped my uncle write it, she went on this huge, insane tangent with tons of swearing about how none of us should be like him, commit his sins, etc., that he died of AIDS as a punishment. That was the most homophobic and hateful few minutes I can ever remember hearing. It was so disrespectful to everyone, and so terrible. She was an ugly person. Did no one stop her? Or correct the record for everyone in the room later? Why was she given the role of reading the letter out loud? I'm so angry on your uncle's behalf. That's horrid. I hope she got held to account for that terrible move. Yeah, there was a lot of complicated to the story. It's sad. Most of his friends died before him. You know, AIDS plaque of the 80s, 90s. Sad face. But those who were around she basically told weren't welcome, and we found that out later. So the funeral home was basically all my grandmother's church friends and then her brothers and sisters who were very much like her. So I remember it going on and my dad sitting beside me and just cursing under his breath, calling her a bitch and whispering to me to stay calm. They already had a bad relationship before it leading up. Then he told us all to come with him and we walked out and left. She didn't care, but that was really the last straw for my dad with her. Whole thing was a shit show. I wish he'd said something, but he loved his brother. The part he did say, which was first, was actually beautiful. Fuck that old bitch. When my father died, his bitch second wife had compiled a playlist of all his favorite songs. Jimi Hendrix's national anthem rendition from Woodstock started playing. My half-brother made a funny comment to help lighten the mood and said, "Hey mom, it's your favorite song," because she didn't enjoy it, and she instructed my brother to turn it off. She also did not introduce myself or my aunt and uncle, my father's sister and her husband, to anyone at the funeral, barely acknowledged us. Fucking cunt till the very end, and she had the audacity to try and say she loved me in front of everyone, and I just looked at her and left. The officiant moved the partner of the deceased back a couple of rows, because they weren't family. At least that was their initial reasoning. I'm sure it had nothing to do with the partner being same-sex. I was furious. And then it got worse. The officiant decided to make the entire funeral about mental health, and how everyone should get help. Nothing about the life of the loved one. No celebration of their accomplishments, of the beauty they brought to the world. Nothing. Keep in mind that 80% of the congregation still believed the death was because of physical health reasons. We would have coped with the knowledge, but telling us it was suicide only as a platform for the rest of us to seek help was heartbreaking. Only funeral I've ever rung and complained about. Friend of mine was shot and killed by the police shortly after high school. Long story, but the short version is he lost access to his psych meds and started breaking down, stumbled into someone's backyard and passed out, woke up the police screaming at him, and he was shot. A guy we all knew in high school showed up at his funeral. After he was buried and people were sitting around in shock, He starts giving a speech about how this isn't right, isn't what he would have wanted, and turning it into something about him. He ended up getting tackled by a few people and basically forced to leave. This is a story my father told me from when he was a child in the 1940s. There was an AM church beside the farm where he grew up in rural SC. The church had no electricity. There was a funeral there one evening and the church was lit throughout with candles. The church building had existed since just after emancipation and was in really bad shape. The flooring had been severely damaged by termites. During the funeral, the floor gave way, making the casket tumble and the body fall out. Everyone ran out of the church in terror. Making matters worse, the candles that were on the casket fell to the floor and set the church on fire. The whole community watched outside as it burned.